Title, he fed wolf children every night, never realizing their mother was the Star Empress the war had ended 1,000 years ago. Yet somehow, humanity still carried its scars among the stars. A small emergency pod came down through night like a burning prayer. It tore a wound into the forest canopy and landed hard, steam blooming from its skin, startled birds bursting up in a frightened spell of wings. Inside, Elias Jourdain tasted copper and ash and the ghost of old battlefields. He should have died. He didn't. He crawled through a mangled hatch, lay breathing on damp moss, and for a span of heartbeats listened to a world that was not his own. The moon hung as a thin, curved blade above the trees. The air smelled of wet iron and wood sap. Somewhere nearby, water spoke in a soft, patient voice as it ran over stone. He got to his feet as the pod cooled and cracked. He had the old aches, shoulder torn in a skirmish at Akron Rim, a rib that never healed right after the ambush at Tau Pearls, a wrist with too much metal in it. His suit's bio-monitors blinked a tired amber. Still here, he told the night, and he didn't sound impressed. He worked like men do when they are alone and want to keep living. He hauled the emergency tent into the lee of a fallen trunk, stacked stones into a ring, coaxed a flame from a starter coil and a scrap of ration wrapper. The fire answered him, small at first, then brighter, as if it too remembered 1,000 years of human stubbornness. They came out of the dark as the fire found its voice. At first he thought they were reflections, the way eyes sometimes catch flame. Then he saw the bodies behind the eyes. Small, low to the ground, fur the silver of early frost, ears pricked forward, paws that barely dented the fern loam. They were not afraid, not exactly. They were the pause before a decision. They were the forest taking measure of a stranger. Elias kept his hands slow. He cracked a ration pack, tore a bar into quarters, tossed one into the shadows. A shape darted and the bar vanished. No growls, no snapping of teeth, just the quiet shiver of something hungry that didn't want to be rude. "Okay," he murmured, tearing another piece. "Table for 4. A second shape flowed forward, then a third. By the time the fourth took its turn, his heartbeat had steadied. He saw details now. The fur wasn't just silver. It held a secret constellation of faint glow spots, as if each hair had trapped a shard of fallen starlight. Their eyes were wrong, too beautiful, too human, green irises banded with gold, pupils that shaped themselves to the fire's flicker. One had a crooked ear. One wore a notch in its tail like a sailor wears a story. He counted again. 5. They stayed until the fire sank to ember orange, then melted back into the trees. The night closed behind them without a sound. Elias lay awake listening to leaves speak to wind and tried, without success, to convince himself he had only fed animals. The second night they came sooner. He sat cross-legged, broke his food with his hands, offered it open-palmed. The smallest one crept close enough to touch. It leaned in, sniffed, then carefully pressed its cold nose against his wrist. Elias didn't move. He felt the faint damp of breath, the hum of a tiny tremor that might have been fear or something else. It ate from his palm and retreated 2 steps, then 3, and sat like a child pretending not to be eager. He named them after the things this world gave him. Dusty for the ash smudge on his mask's cheek. Ash for the burn scar in his fur. Luna for the way she always looked up. Pip for the nervous bounce. Ember for the crooked ear and the way she watched the fire like it was telling her a secret. He told himself not to get attached. He failed almost immediately. Days became honest work. He salvaged what the crash hadn't devoured: water condensers, a coil stove, 2 knives, a patch of medjool, 3 solar sails so scorched they cracked like old paint when he unfurled them. He stitched a shelter out of the pod's skins, hoisted it under a long slanted branch as wide as a barge, set snares, learned which roots boiled into something edible and which oozed a milky poison that made the tongue go numb. He talked to the fire because it talked back. He talked to the trees when wind moved through them like rain over bells. He talked to the 5 small knot wolves because their silence made him feel seen. At night, he shared. At night, they drew near, and when the moon spun toward thinness and the temperature fell and breath silvered in the dark, Elias considered lifting his tent flap and letting them inside. He didn't. He sat up against his pack and watched their small bodies all curled together, ember light painting gentle shadows across their flanks. He slept finally with his boots still on. He woke before dawn and laid the first food of the day on a flat rock like an altar. Loneliness changed shape. It didn't vanish. It became quieter, almost companionable. The woods allowed him to be a guest. The stream gave him a place to wash the old war salt out of his clothes. The cold didn't bite so hard when the 5 sets of watchful eyes were there to borrow a little heat from the fire's skin. He stopped hoping for rescue out loud. He fed them. He kept breathing. The forest had sounds he had never learned in any of the smaller wars. A night bird sung in a scale that human throats forgot somewhere south of childhood. Tall ferns rustled in a way that suggested thought passing through them like a message. Sometimes lightning happened upward, crawling from ground to cloud in blue fronds that rang like struck crystal. On one such night of upward lightning, Ember pressed against his knee. Her small heartbeat tapped a quick code that made something tired in him go gentle. He laid his palm on her skull and felt a warmth that was not heat but something strangely intimate, like the hush in a church when light comes through stained glass just right. "I'm going to get you through the winter," he told her. He meant it. He didn't know yet that this planet had 3 winters and they braided together like rivers. The wound came in the 3rd week. Ash misjudged a thorn branch and opened a long, precise cut along his flank. The blood was wrong, not red, but quicksilver with a drift of blue when it hit leaf. Elias cleaned it, hand steady, not because he wasn't afraid, but because fear had already had its turn and he was done letting it decide. The medjol sealed the skin too neatly. Ash slept. In the morning there was no scar. That should have been the first impossible thing. It was not. The first impossible thing was the voice in his head the night after. It was not a sound exactly. It was the memory of another person's voice, perfectly recalled on the first hearing, and it said, "You have cared for my young." He did not leap up or spin. He breathed in and tasted pine pitch and water and the faint electric scent that follows lightning. He breathed out and said quietly, "I didn't know they were yours." Across the fire, a tall figure installed itself between trees as if the very dark had grown impatient and decided to stand there. Armor clung to a body like running water. Constellations mapped themselves along its curves. The face was not a face, a geometry of light and shadow and the suggestion of eyes that could look at a star and see its childhood. Elias did not bow. He also did not reach for the rifle. He kept his voice where it was. They were hungry. Yes. The voice touched more than his hearing. It was in the bones near the ear and in the pre-speech parts of thought and in places he used to pray with as a boy. They were, and you were alone. Yet you shared. "Wasn't mine to hoard," he said. It embarrassed him how stubborn it came out. A pause like the forest waiting to see which way the storm would bend. "Then you're kind, you endure." This wasn't flattery. It was almost clinical, the way a biologist notes how a plant turns its leaves to the light and lives anyway. She did not come closer. She didn't need to. The fire seemed aware of her presence, flame narrowing, taking its cues like a singer adjusting to the entrance of a great contralto. The 5 knot wolves, her children, did not cower. They arranged themselves around Elias as if he were the center of a circle they had drawn earlier in the soft earth. "You have a name?" he asked. It felt absurd and human to make that move across a gulf like this. He did it anyway. "You would call me Empress," the voice said with a slant of humor that surprised him, "because you like the shape of hierarchy and the taste of titles in the mouth. My people do not speak like this. We sing in thought, but for you I will be Empress." "Then I'm Elias," he said, and these 5 their good company. Her attention angled toward the smallest, who was leaning against his shin with the assured possessiveness of children who have claimed something. Ember, she said, and if a smile could be light, perhaps it was. Luna, Pip, Ash, Dusty. She repeated the names without needing to learn them, as if time itself had seen them briefly and then gone back to tell her. "I'll keep feeding them," he said. "You will keep being yourself. That is all I ask." In the morning, the flat rock that had been his altar was covered with food he did not recognize. Bright, stacked things that steamed faintly and did not smell of any world he had known. Tools had been left as if by careful ghosts. A small device not larger than a hand that hummed softly and either purified, repaired, or blessed whatever he held near it. Then she was gone the way long grief goes, not with a door but by becoming silence that will not leave you. He rebuilt his life with gifts he did not know how to deserve. The device repaired his solar sails until they drank daylight like birds drink rain. It turned brackish water clean at a gesture. It fused a broken knife into integrity. When he slept, he dreamed of cities of light woven into planetary rings, of tall beings walking through music, and thought the way he walked through woods. He saw a palace that was not a palace but a slow-orbiting cathedral built from the husk of a comet. He saw a woman, a mother, holding 5 lives in her arms and hiding them here in a cradle world while armies that defied definition tore at the empire she had sworn to tend. The children grew. Children always do, but not usually so fast. They learned to come when he whistled. They learned not to eat the purple fern that smelled like rotting peaches. They learned to sit like people and touch things with careful paws and tilt their heads when he spoke. Once Luna took a spoon in her mouth and carefully set it in his hand as if to say, "This is yours and I am done with it." He tried not to teach them the wrong parts of being human. He knew his people's gifts and their cruelties. He taught them to share. He taught them to wait. He taught them that fire asks to be respected. He taught them that hurt things looked at you with the same eyes hungry things used, and that both asked for decency. When winter of the first river came, white along the stream, the trees sounding like glass when wind touched them, he slept with ashes warm back against his calf, and woke to embers small weight across his boots like the memory of a child. The Empress came and went. Each time the air changed when she neared, but in the gentlest way, as if pressure eased, as if a bruise somewhere inside him softened and decided to heal. She said little but left him understanding that soaked in like rain into inland rock. Her empire was more than distance and walls. It was how minds held each other without turning love into a debt. It was song and law braided in the same bright river. War had come to it like rust comes, slow and then suddenly everywhere. A month later the rust found Elias. It arrived in a sky-shaped knife. Raiders. Their ship fell out of black like a gloved hand shutting out a candle. He knew their kind. He had served on the edges of the edges where law thinned and men with old hungers reinvented old cruelties with new tools. He had watched entire colonies go gray with fear and then quiet with nothing. He had seen what happened when the universe left a room unattended. The forest felt them the way skin feels a storm. Birds leapt. Ferns stilled. The upward lightning fled. Ember stood, taller than a pup now, the ridges of bone under her fur showing a strength that had no interest in a predator's swagger. She looked at him. He said, "We run." He meant the children, he meant himself last. He grabbed the rifle. It had lived on his tense post like an old argument. He checked the cell without looking, the way a soldier does when drills have become reflexes embedded in the wrists. "Keep low," he told the 5. He led them along the creek bed, down where stones would throw off heat and scent. The first raider dropped into the clearing like a strike of bad weather. Armor that was all edges, hands that were all purchase. Blasters with what passed for intelligence stitched into their targeting. Elias shot first, not for advantage, but because he needed to choose action over fear. The bolt found a joint. The raider fell and the forest accepted the weight of him. Two more came. Something about the way they moved said this was routine. It wasn't terror. It wasn't rage. It was work. It did not stay that way. Ash hit the second one like a line of silver lightning. He wasn't an animal by then and wasn't human. He was his own truth blooming. The raider's thigh opened where claws wrote their opinion on it. Luna came low and precise like a thrown blade. Dusty came in high. Pip ripped at a cable until spark jumped and gear whined. Ember stood between Elias and a third bolt, not to take it, but to sing. Not with a voice, but with the kind of vibration that lives in bone and organ and the skin's deeper layers. The bolt bent subtly and struck a tree. The tree took it and did not burn. They were faster than he understood, stronger than he had believed, brighter than he had dared hope, and very new. He worried in a half-second the way fathers do in their quiet hours. This was the kind of learning that hurt. Elias took a shot and the third raider fell. Then the world went white. She arrived. Not from above, not exactly. The sky gave way. A seam opened in reality and what came through was presence. Where she walked, moss stood up straighter. Where she looked, light had to earn the right to remain. The raiders fired. What they fired became different. It lost the ambition to be killing and became heat that drifted off into cold. Her voice clipped the air like fate clearing its throat. You harm what is mine. The raiders knew fear then. It was small and made their aim worse. It ended quickly, not because she was cruel, but because she had other work to do in 1,000 possible tomorrows, and this trouble demanded a firm punctuation. She did not kill them in the way wars have taught. She did something that unmakes harm instead. They sagged down asleep without the will to hurt. Later, she would send them off with the memory of mercy burned into their hands, so that they would not forget touch could be otherwise. She bent to Elias. She did something that mended the coil of his old scarred shoulder and drew the heat of a recent burn away as easily as picking burrs from a sock. He looked up at her and found that, in spite of knowing better, he smiled like a boy offered water in a desert. "Thank you," he said, "because gratitude is an old language that wears well. You kept them alive," she said. "When I could not be here, you were." The children had arranged themselves around both of them, not in a circle, but in a shape that implied circle, like a constellation half discovered. Ember looked up and God help him, she was changing under his eyes. Her forelegs, longer now, found new geometry. The shoulders rolled back. A second set of eyelids closed and opened. The starlit spots in her fur brightened until they could not be mistaken for anything other than thought light. He had known, of course, in the way a man knows a weather is breaking. He had pretended otherwise. People always do with endings they love. He got through the next days by working. He cleaned the camp. He buried what should be buried. He repaired the fish snares and resighted them where the rivulet braided into silver threads. The Empress visited but did not linger, the way mothers of large realms must be both present and mercifully absent. She spoke to him without speaking a few times. He learned things he did not know how to store. Once she pressed her palm to a rotted log, and from the rot came a bloom of delicate fungi that smelled like clean rain. Once she plucked the old shrapnel shard from his wrist without breaking skin and set it down in his palm as if returning an unhelpful souvenir. He wept then, not because of pain, but because of the way care can undo you when you thought you were done needing it. A week later, a different ship arrived. The hull wore the colors of a consortium that pretended to be charity and was not. They landed narrow and polite, long legs bending like herons. These were not raiders. They were businessmen with a better narrative, and they walked with the law in their pockets. They smiled when they spoke and used the word partner the way old thieves say family. They had picked up faint whispers of a relic in the forest, rumors of a device that could heal with a thought, or a woman who was not a woman. They had come to buy a miracle and sell it at seminar prices. The Empress was away. The children were off following a scent line that sent them loping like joy. Elias faced the men with soft shoes alone. He used an old trick. He did not answer the first question. He identified their need and spoke to that need. He fed them with hospitality that complicated their sense of superiority. He offered them water and fire warmth. He listened to their 10-minute version of "We are here to help you" and answered with the 4-word version, "I'm not for sale." The leader of them, a man with pale eyes that got dull when he thought about numbers, which was often, smiled like he was putting down cards he knew would win. "We're prepared to relocate you to a safer world. Citizenship, credits, protection. All we ask is the finder's cooperation with our research. This place isn't good for you, Mr. Jourdain." "Good's relative," Elias said, "and you got my name from my beacon, I'll bet." "That's public broadcast," the man said smoothly. "We did nothing improper. What do you sell him once you have whatever you came for?" Elias asked. "Hope, don't do that. Leave hope alone. It doesn't join partnerships." Polite wore through. The pale eyes cooled. He tried threats in the shape of concern. "We can't ensure your safety." If he tried flattery as if it were grease on a stuck bolt. "A war hero like you understands the value of." He tried orphan's guilt. "Think of all the sick we could help." Elias held. He had learned long ago that saying the same no 3 times in 3 different ways made most men move on to easier targets. They did not move on. They came back at night. They used sound the way surgeons do, precise, not messy. Sound that softened muscles and suggested sleep in a voice just below the ear of awareness. Elias woke into the soft gravity of it like a swimmer coming up under a winter lid of ice. He rolled off his cot, fingers finding rifle leather before his eyes found the door. They had not counted on the children. Dusty's warning growl rolled in like surf. Luna slid under the tent's flap as if she were water finding the lowest place. Ember came last and simply stood where Elias could see her out of his right eye, and that did more to settle him than any training he had ever endured. He did not fire, he spoke. "Let's do our talking where the stars can hear it." They did. The stars had no stake but liked a good story, and this night was tired of choosing sides. "You could have been good men," Elias said. He meant it. He had stood to the left and right of goodness often enough to know it was not a spear but a weather, and anyone could find themselves under a different sky given time. "You could still choose to be. We're professionals," the leader said. "That's not a synonym," Elias said. "You know what you came for isn't yours." A shape moved behind the leader, another man who looked like a brother born close. They weren't going to leave. Elias shifted his stance and the children shifted with him. A hand went for something designed to hum a target to sleep. Elias shot him in the wrist. The sound weapon fell and sang to the dirt. It was suddenly very quiet except for the sound of the stream saying the same thing it always says. The leader's voice lost its polish. "You're going to regret that." "No," Elias said, "but you might." They left with that ancient word men have been hurling at each other since sticks were new. Later, for 3 nights the forest felt watched. The Empress returned on the 4th, and when she listened to Elias's quiet report, the sky above the clearing tightened and then eased again. "These are the soft thieves," she said. "They never break a door they can convince you to open for them." "Will they try again?" Elias asked. "Yes," she said, "because they do not understand what you do, what we do. They think the universe is full of objects. They have not learned to see subjects yet." He didn't sleep well after that. He wasn't afraid so much as expectant, the way a soldier's body remembers night's assignments. He was right to wait. They came before dawn, interval timing set to when men are deepest inside sleep. They had learned from the failed sound weapon gambit. They used gas this time, gentle as a lullaby. They moved with kindness on their faces like a counterfeit. The children breathed out in unison. It wasn't a howl. It wasn't air. It was something else. An answer to pressure that made pressure forget its project. The gas drifted sideways like it had a different appointment it was late for. The men ran forward into a piece of news that refused to be ignored. They were not in control of what happened next. Elias held up his hands, empty, palms showing. "You don't want to do this." The leader's pale eyes went past Elias and landed on Ember. Something greedy became reverent and then warped into greed again. He forgot his excellent manners and reached out like grabbing a fairy tale. Ember stepped back, not in fear but in refusal. That was when the forest itself took sides. Vines opened across ground that had seemed bare. Roots found ankles and thought better of crushing them and simply held. Trees leaned in. Wind aligned. The pale-eyed man froze, not because he couldn't move, but because for the first time in his professional life he recognized there was a scale larger than the one he had mastered. He swallowed. He looked at Elias as if a jury had convened behind the human's eyes. "I'm offering help," he said weakly. "You're offering ownership," Elias said. "We don't do that here." They left the second time with a different word ancient among men, sorry. Sometimes sorry is a lie, sometimes it is an opening. Elias didn't guess which. He let the stream keep speaking for him. The children changed more in the next month. Shoulders shifted under silver. Eyes learned to hold secrets gently. They tried walking upright and fell and laughed in a language that was gestures and breath. Luna learned to make a sound with her throat that matched the forest's nocturne. The trees liked her for it. Ash learned to bring a tool and lay it by Elias's hand precisely when the man needed it. And if that wasn't empathy, what was? Pip discovered that if you tap your paw on a stone in a certain rhythm, the stone answers. Dusty discovered the patience of fishing. Ember began to speak, not in words, not at first, in timing, in gaze, in the way she would put her head into Elias's palm and hold steady as if they were plugging something tender back into a socket. The first human word came one evening when rain made the forest thin and private. Elias set a bowl down and said, "Eat," the way he always had, and Ember looked up and said softly, perfectly, "Eat." Something in Elias broke and mended simultaneously. He went very still. He smiled with his mouth and eyes both, which he did not often. "Good," he said. "Good, Ember." "Good," Ember said and put her head under his hand firmly like a command. The Empress came that night and stood a long time very quiet. When she finally spoke into his mind, the voice had a layer under it he had not heard before. "You are teaching them to be more than heirs," she said. "You are teaching them to be persons. We build empires for persons, or we should not build them at all." "I'm just teaching table manners," Elias said, embarrassed, which is what good men say when they are doing holy work but can't stand the sound of the word. "You are teaching them to belong without owning," she said. "It is the old human magic. For a while, peace. Real peace. The low river kind that keeps being itself even as anything else changes along its banks." The pale-eyed men did not return. Raiders gave this forest a long, wide shape on their maps with a burnt orange line around it labeled "Do Not." Elias let his hair get long because no one alive cared if it did. He built a fence not to keep anything out, but to invite a boundary to be acknowledged. He strung a clothesline that made him feel civilized. He sang when he sharpened knives because singing makes sharp things gentler. He tried not to count the days. He always knew anyway. The rescue beacon he had boosted with Empress-gifted tools kept quietly sending his name into cold space. He no longer wanted the ship that would answer it, but wanting had never been a reliable measure of what arrives next. The answer came not as a ship, but as a confluence of troubles. A flare from the sun of this world that would likely burn off a slice of atmosphere. A border conflict somewhere 6 systems over that had pulled the Empress away to keep a long chain of lesser empires from tripping into each other in a fireworks display of masculine shame. And because the universe enjoys rhythm, those same raiders from before deciding that a forest that had once killed them might now be in a different mood. They came stronger and worse. They came with the kind of numbers that make math a sorrow. They came in 2 ships and a yaw of smaller hungry craft that yelped like hounds. Elias watched them come and found that his hands did what hands remember. He moved the children to the old ravine where ground went sudden and safe. He packed only what you keep when you have to prove to yourself that you won't regret later the way you spent this hour. The small photographs he carried, the boy with a grin and a missing tooth. The woman whose eyes never forgave the world for its cruelty but forgave him everything. A postcard with an ugly drawing of a mountain he loved anyway. The little device, his knife, the spool of good cord, the children's sleep blanket he'd woven from river reeds and Empress-gifted thread. He knelt. He touched Ember's head. "If I tell you to run," he said, "you run, you don't look back." Ember shook her head the way teenagers do when you tell them bedtime exists. "Don't," he said. "Please, Ember." Her eyes did a thing eyes do that isn't tears in her kind but means the same. She leaned her forehead into his, and for an instant something in him that never had learned to pray correctly found itself bright and used its voice. He took the old rifle and went to meet Math. The raiders expected an ambush. They got one. It simply wasn't from him. The forest remembered. It remembered her and her children and the man who fed them when he had no food himself. It remembered mercy baked into its soil like minerals. It rose in its way. Roots took a vote and the outcome was consensus. Rocks that had minded their business for a geologic patience turned their faces outward. The stream, which ordinarily only conducts diplomacy with gravity, decided to be loud for once and changed course for an hour. Everything leaned. The ground communicated to Boots a feeling it had learned from the Empress: stand down. Elias added his small yes to the land's large one. He shot what he had to and only that. He moved and made himself bad math. When he missed, Luna didn't. When he fell, Ash body checked him back to his feet and snarled at a bolt that was thinking about choosing his spine. And then the white again. The seam. The arrival. This time she did not arrive as a single presence. She arrived as memory of 1,000 mothers poured into one bright form and the gentle impatience of a surgeon who has been told she cannot save this one and proceeds to do it anyway. She did not waste a word. Enough. The raiders' ships lay down gently on their bellies as if tired of pretending to be predators. Every weapon's will to hurt turned into an urge to be inert. The men inside stumbled into a realization. Everyone realizes it eventually if given a chance. There is a scale larger than your own certainty. The Empress touched her mind to Elias's. "You will be hurt," she said, and there was the smallest ache under the words because speaking this was not alleviating it in her. But not today. "I'm past my warranty," he said, and the way she half-laughed inside him cured him of 3 aches he hadn't told her he still owned. They won, which is a way of saying that nothing died that shouldn't, and the children did not have to learn a lesson they were not ready for. The ships left without the swagger of victory or the ugly tantrum of defeat. They left with the humility of people who saw a mother and understood something about the universe they had been avoiding. The Empress stood in the clearing after, tall beyond tall, and looked at Elias the way a queen looks at a farmer who followed his own rules, and the kingdom is better for it. "I should take them soon," she said in him. "They will need what I can teach them, and the Empire will not wait politely while I practice being human here." He thought about the quiet that would come after. He thought about the way Ember would learn to say words he would not hear her say. He thought about his own life and how it had been one long apprenticeship in the art of leaving. He nodded once. "I know," he said. "I knew the first night. I will not take them out of your story," she said, and it felt like a promise that could bend time. "You will be their old man in 1,000 songs." "Do me a favor then," he said. "When they do something foolish and brave, and they will, remind them to eat." She turned slightly, and if light could be amused, it was. "I will." The day of leaving came like all good leavings, not with fanfare but with the quiet busy work that keeps hands from making a larger ritual than the heart can survive. Elias cooked more than anyone needed to eat. He packed embarrassingly small gifts in a bag he pretended not to have woven for that purpose. A knife with a handle he had carved to fit Ember's new hand, a tiny river stone that looked like a moon, a spool of fishing line, a comb, the little photograph of a boy with the missing tooth turned into an amulet because love wants to be worn. He laid them out and said nothing. The Empress showed him the ship. It did not have edges. It was made of the idea of leaving and coming back wrapped in a skin of light. The children walked up into it without feet, and with all the grace of beings who had discovered their next form mid-step. Ember turned at the threshold. "Elias," she said, adding body and breath to his name like a blessing. He stepped forward and put his hands on either side of her head, thumbs just behind the jaw the way guardians do when the rules of their hearts haven't been written down yet. He didn't say be good or don't forget me. He had given her better words by living. He simply said, go on then, go be great. She nodded once like a soldier acknowledging orders. Then she ruined it like a daughter and leaned in so quickly it surprised them both, pressing her forehead to his again, and he felt a pop inside like a long, small thorn drawing itself finally out of him. They left. The sky healed around the seam like water after a fish, a small stirring then smooth again. The forest set itself back on its haunches and resumed the good work of growing. He cleaned the camp quiet. He cut the fire down to an ember and covered it. He sat on the old log and did that thing men do when they have done all they were required to and are left indoors with themselves. He breathed. The stream kept the clock. A week later, a human ship came, a small survey craft out of New Thessaly with 2 pilots who argued like brothers and a medic who cussed like a botanist. They landed crooked. They ran down the ramp with their hands up like they were sorry for being late to the party. Elias looked up and saw in their faces that good, stupid human thing, the way we always look a little surprised that survival worked again. They patched him. They fed him something that tasted like home and had no right to. They asked for a story. He told them careful in the way old men tell truths you have to have earned. He did not give them the parts that belonged to the Empress because someone else would sing those later and better. He told them the human parts. He said, I fed some children. I lived. I tried to be decent. The forest helped. They took him aboard and asked if there was anything he needed to bring. He looked at the small tent. He looked at the rock where he had made an altar of food and found you can make an altar anywhere. He picked up the bag he had woven that had one small thing left in it, a river stone shaped like a moon, because he had more poems in him yet and would need to remember how to write them. They flew him up through cloud. The planet tipped under, turning its face to be painted with ocean. Space opened the way a door opens when you are expected. He lay back and let the old bones make their usual complaints, and listened to the hum human ships make that reminds you of a cat on a window ledge at afternoon. He did not sleep until they were beyond the reach of that atmosphere's mothering hand. He dreamed then. He dreamed of Ember's hand holding a knife correctly on some other world. He dreamed of Luna teaching a tree a song the tree already knew but had wanted to hear from a friend. He dreamed of Ash standing behind someone smaller and taking a hit that did not belong to him and smiling afterward, because choosing is the oldest human victory. He dreamed of Dusty learning not to love warfare, but to love people so fiercely that warfare grew ashamed and walked away. He dreamed of Pip making everyone around him laugh until they forgot to be afraid and went and did the hard thing. Years turned, the way they do when you start counting by harvest instead of birthdays. Elias turned into an article that younger soldiers repeated wrong and then better. The old wolfmen of Oris III, they said, and turned it into a drinking song. He settled on a small star station once, fixed kettles that didn't know they were broken, kept to a schedule that didn't own him. He played cards with men who lied about their hands and told the truth about their mothers. He wrote letters to no one and threw them into decommissioned message beacons like the thick kind of prayer that's just the shape of wanting to mean something. Then came the day the galaxy changed without asking permission. It began with a rumor that walked dock to dock wearing fascination like a coat. The Star Empress had returned from the dark with a fleet that sang. The fleet was not built. It had been grown. It moved not like war but like grammar. It corrected untruths in the heavens. Where it went, tyrants stopped being the subject of their own sentences. A broadcast followed, not words, not entirely. A melody that knew what hunger had done to us and offered bread anyway. A map, stars connected in lines that made no military sense and every human sense. On those lines, kindness became a route ships could take. Elias felt it in his old bones and smiled into his tea. He looked out a station window at a cheap manufactured sunrise and said, "That's my girl," because he was allowed to think it even if the universe would laugh. He was not wrong. The first real sign came a month later when a human courier arrived with a package wrapped in a substance no one could name without making God laugh. Inside, a comb worn smooth by deliberate use, a new knife with a handle carved in a style that copied his own mistakes, a spool of thread that had learned 3 new colors, a little river stone that looked like their moon but slightly wrong, and a small photograph. The photograph showed a tall woman in armor that was not a costume standing with 5 others who shared her light. The 6th figure at the edge, the one who had clearly wandered into the image at the last second, was a man with a crooked smile and eyes that said he would throw his entire body between harm and anyone smaller. Ember. There was writing on the back in a careful hand that wanted to be perfect and had settled for legible, "Eat." Under it, "Please." Under that, in a different hand that insisted on elegance, "She is terrible at resting. I tell her what you told me to tell her. She listens. Sometimes." Empress, he laughed until the card table trembled. Then he cried as if someone had handed him back a decade he thought he'd misplaced. He thought that might be enough. Old men who have won by surviving do not ask for too much. The universe disagreed. The empire Ember's mother guarded so ferociously had not run out of enemies. One of them was an old thing in a new mask. It lived in the broken-down parts of galaxies, drank vacuum like whiskey, and liked to eat the idea of home. It was not alive in the way a person is, but it was not alive. It was hunger that got good at making an argument for itself. It opened its mouth in a corner of space near human worlds and began to sing in the key of devour. Stations blinked out like bad bulbs. Ships lost their names and remembered them too late. City planets with more hearts than the sky has rooms in them shuddered. The Empress went there. Of course she did. She brought her children. Of course she did. Elias knew it before any broadcast told him. He packed his bag with the small stupid things we carry when we don't know what matters, thread and a spoon and the river stone, and went to meet a shuttle he had no ticket for. The dockmaster, a lovely woman who feared nothing but indifference, didn't ask for a ticket. "You belong on this," she said, as if reading a label on the inside of him and not bothering to explain who had sewn it there. He arrived in time to see the edge of a war that didn't look like war. The Empress's fleet sang precisely. The enemy sang messily. Between those two musics lay everything worth saving. Human ships tried to add their voices and found they didn't have the old instruments tuned for it. They still came. Elias watched as pilots who had never learned this scale invented it in midair. He watched as mechanics coaxed engines to endure just long enough to get families out of the gravitational wrongness that lived in the enemy's mouth. He watched men and women, and neither and both refused to be consumed. He found his way to a platform that had to be at least partly alive. He took orders from a captain younger than the fear in Elias's first scar. He ran lines. He moved crates. He held hands that wanted to shake. He told jokes so bad they rewrote despair into irritation. He did not go to the front because the front was everywhere. and he knew his job was to refill cups and fire at anything that came near wearing the wrong song. The Empress appeared on screens when she could, not to give speeches but to be present. The way a mother's face near your crib is a speech you understand before language. Ember appeared once, all luminous danger, and the shock of seeing someone you loved whom the world had remade into a shape you never knew to imagine. She didn't see him, he didn't need her to, he saw her. He watched the way she stood slightly forward of her siblings, stupidly brave as always. He whispered without meaning to, "Eat," and the man next to him, the young captain, looked at him and grinned and whispered back, "Yes, sir," and did. The bad music doubled down, it changed key and went louder. It stopped pretending it wanted anything other than ruin. The Empress did not raise her voice. She took it lower, slower. She invited the hunger to try being a different thing for a minute, the way mothers invite tantrums to become naps. The hunger didn't know how. That was the problem with it. It was a child that had been allowed to stay a child too long. It went for the platform. The platform shuddered. Gravity slurred. Lights went what sailors call sick. Men screamed. Somewhere a tea kettle fell and shattered, and Elias thought, there goes a small thing that meant a great deal to someone. He could do very little about the shape of space. He could do a specific little. He grabbed 2 harnesses, clipped one to the young captain's suit and one to a rail that looked like a tendon. He lowered that boy until his boots found a foothold that faced the wrong direction. He secured him. He put a heat gun in his hands. "You keep this line hot," he said, not shouting because shouting would break something in him. "You don't let this line go dark." The boy nodded like a person nods when he has been given a task that is exactly the size of him, not bigger, not smaller. He kept the line hot. The platform kept breathing. On the far screen, a window into a different scale of ache, the Empress took a wound. It was not the kind human bodies take. It showed as a sudden dimming of a constellation along her arm, a brief stumbling in the step of a fleet that had been rehearsed for 1,000 years. Ember moved without thinking. Of course she did. The wound wasn't mortal. It was a story trying to become larger than it deserved. Ember stepped into that story and told it what it could be instead. She turned and faced the hunger itself. She did not speak. She let it see her. She let it understand that someone had fed her when there was not enough. That someone had taught her how to make a small fire and protect it with her body and give it to others. That someone had told her that eating and sleeping and saying thank you were not chores, but rituals that made you a person. She let hunger see what happens when love survives. Hunger hesitated, because hesitation is built into every tyranny. It must look at the mirror of a better way and flinch. The Empress took that flinch and made it into a door and walked through carrying her people, and as many strangers as she could scoop up on the way. The war ended not with a bang, but with exhaustion. The hunger had to go away to remember itself. The fleet returned to the right key. The station stopped trembling. The tea kettle would have to be replaced and would not be, because people who have seen the edge of all things often put off buying kettles and then regret it the rest of their lives. Elias made a note to get that boy a kettle. After, the Empress came to the platform not as a queen to subjects or a general to troops, but as a woman entering a kitchen. She touched hands. She looked at faces for a second longer than is customary, and that second filled up holes people had carried around in them for years. She found Elias sitting on a crate using a spool of thread to teach his fingers to be calm again. She stood before him, and for a moment he was 40 and tired and in love with everything. "You were where you needed to be," she said in him. "Never was much good at anything else," he said, and she did that laugh inside that lined stars up different. Ember appeared like a knife does when you realize you had it the whole time and you can finally cut the cord. She was tall in a way height can't measure. She stood like someone who had just learned she was strong enough to be gentle. She looked at Elias like rivers do at ocean. "Eat," she said, and did not wait for permission before scooping him into an embrace that would have broken lesser men. He held on. He ate the moment. He lived long. Not by human standards, long by Elias's. He did not become famous beyond the kind of fame that gets a dish named after you in the right small outpost bar. He kept his tools ready. He fixed kettles. He moved lines. He showed boys where to stand and girls where to aim and neither where to compromise. He slept sometimes with the radio on low to hear the new songs humans had learned to sing because aliens had given them better ears. He received letters sometimes. They were not letters. They were little packets of scent and sound and images that made better sense than prose. One showed Ember at a market arguing price with a trader and losing on purpose because the trader's son needed medicine. One showed Dusty on a stage making a roomful of very tired people laugh until their bellies were sore and their shoulders dropped. One showed Luna leaning her head against a glass wall at a zoo and singing to a creature that had been lonely for generations and didn't know it. One showed Pip kissing someone goodbye at a dock and not apologizing for needing to go do a good thing first. One showed Ash teaching a class of small children how to secure a line and bragging about a human who taught him this once by not bragging. The Empress sent fewer messages because ruling is a weather that never quite clears. But when she did, they were perfect and landed like bread on a table exactly at the moment you realize hunger is not a metaphor. She thanked him again, which made him roll his eyes and made him sit straighter the next day when he repaired a hinge. The pale-eyed men came back into his life exactly once. Years had worn them different. The leader had a daughter and it had rearranged his priorities. He came as a courier, hat in his hands in the way men do when they've had cause to reevaluate and want to show the posture of it. He brought a payment from some consortium that liked to make good late, and a letter that said, in effect, "I am sorry I could not be better sooner." Elias said, "Better now counts," and meant it. The man cried in a station corridor with strangers walking past, pretending not to see because respect. When Elias lay down to die all the way, he did it like he did everything on a schedule that refused drama. He was not in a bed. He was on a bench by a window looking at a moon no one important had ever named. The young captain, older now with a limp he wore like jewelry, sat beside him. They talked about kettles. They did not talk about fear. The Empress visited without anyone else noticing. She put her palm on his forehead and was a mother in that instant not only to her own children but to the universe, which has always been an orphan waiting for someone to claim it. She said nothing. She did not have to. Ember stood at the foot of the bench and did not ask him to stay. She had learned the difference between want and love. She said one word, the word that started it all: eat. It was a joke and a prayer and a command and a thank you and a goodbye. He closed his eyes as if ending a very good book. He did not see darkness. He saw the forest that had adopted him. He saw 5 small silver knot wolves approaching the fire as if they had never left. He saw himself put food down on a rock and get back more than anyone is owed. The galaxy changed in small measurable ways he would have liked. Laws bent toward mercy. Armies had to file forms longer than victory speeches before they were allowed to move. Women with nothing but stubbornness learned they could buy ships at half price if they said the right empress's name to the right clerk. Men who had been told all their lives that being hard was a virtue learned the shock of being soft and lived through it and then loved it. When historians tried to write the bigger book, they struggled. It was easy to put the Empress on the cover. It was easy to chart ships. It was harder to parse out exactly why everything had not fallen apart. The best of them found the moment a man put a ration bar on a rock because 5 knot wolves were hungry, and they wrote it right. They said, people like him are the hinge the door swings on and don't expect you to notice. They told it to children. The children grew up and told it better. In some versions there were 5 wolves. In some versions there were 7 because 7 is a good number and stories cheat. In all the good versions, a tired man feeds hungry things without asking whether they will be of any use later. In all the best versions, The mother of the hungry things turns out to be a queen and says thank you without using the word. At the anniversaries of the war that wasn't quite war, people lit small fires in their kitchens and fed bread to them, and told the sky they were ready to be decent again. Human ships learned the key the Empress sang in. Alien ships learned the trick of human stubbornness. Somewhere a forest lifted its leaves to rain and remembered, too. No one built a statue for Elias because he would have hated it. They planted trees along station corridors instead. Children ran under them and reached up, and the branches bent just so to make them feel tall. And when the story is told now, with a good voice, the kind that fills a room, the ending is always the same because the old truths don't need new shoes to go farther. And that day, the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, thank you for listening. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.